Okay, so now this will be recorded. I hope everyone is okay with that. But now you have been informed. So, welcome everyone to this community coffee and chat session by the Community Engagement Forum. I always start by introducing the Community Engagement Forum, which is a global community of practice on community engagement of displaced populations. We're part of the global CCM cluster, and we're open for displacement practitioners from any background, sector, cluster, profession. So today we are joined by Epa Ndahimana. I'll introduce you in a short time, but just to say that the findings and recommendations from the study that Epa will present today is very important for setting the strategic direction for the Community Engagement Forum. It will provide suggestions for what changes we need to make if we want to make this community of practice more accessible and useful for the displaced population members. And then it is up to us as community of practice to choose and decide whether we take these recommendations on board or not. And before I introduce Epa, I just want to say that the format of the session, Epa will present the findings and recommendations from the study, as well as a bit of a background and purpose. And if you have any questions, it would be great if you could either pop them in the chat or you wait until after he's shared his presentation, and then we can have a Q&A session. So when we have the Q&A sessions, I'll first go to the questions in the chat, and then we can raise hands just for transparency, so you know where you are in the questioning queue. So Epa is an economist with over 20 years of personal experience living as a displaced person in Nakivale refugee settlement and in Kampala in Uganda. He's worked with NGOs in Uganda and at the UN in Geneva. He's focusing on making sure displaced populations and people are at the center of policies, projects, and program design, implementation, and reporting. His work and research aim to enable the use of humanitarian resources wisely while working closely with local communities and displaced persons themselves to create positive impact with limited resources. So, the perfect person to recommend how we can take this study forward. So I'm going to hand over to you now, Epa, and I will share my screen and you tell me when to change the slides, okay?
Thank you so much. Okay, thanks so much. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, yes, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to talk to you this afternoon. Over the last few months, I've been lucky to interact with different stakeholders, professionals in the sector, both in the Sub-Saharan Africa, Asia, and Americas, and discussing this topic really of inclusion. I am always excited talking about this topic because I have a personal touch with inclusion and participation as someone who has lived experience in the sector, but also who has worked in the sector and looked at both the practice and the realities of displacement. So it's a pleasure talking to you this afternoon, and I hope we have a very good conversation and honest conversation about this topic. Can you next slide, please? So we have this presentation is going to go as follows. We are going to look at the introduction and background, why did we have this research? Why is it important? The methodology, and then we are going to talk about the key findings, and then recommendations on how we go forward as a community engagement forum. Next slide, please. So a little bit of introduction. While I was lucky to get to work on this topic, or to work on this consultancy as a, and what we're looking at, the community engagement forum, we're looking at how do we examine the value, accessibility, and inclusiveness of the community engagement forum, specifically for forcibly displaced persons. It is also very important to note that this research was not looking at the value or the inclusiveness of professionals or people in the international organizations, because as far as I can see, for them, they're already included. So we're looking at specifically what are the views, what are the commitments, what do you think that the displaced persons want for this, for the community engagement forum to be inclusive? And this is really informed by the movements. I think 10 years from now, 10 years ago, we would not be discussing this topic. We are here discussing this topic because we have had some changes in the last 10 years or 5 years or so, that we are seeing a conversation from the Grand Bargain, from the Global Compact on Refugees, which normally is put together as in the participation revolution. We're saying, instead of responding to displacement, how do we work with the displaced persons to enhance access to services, to design projects better, to put resources where they are supposed to be put. So this is something that it has been happening, because we think, or the sector thinks it is the better way to go in terms of having resources put better. Of course, like I've said, this study does not evaluate the utility or design effectiveness of the community engagement forum platforms for international humanitarian practitioners or even coordination actors. Next slide, please. And what are the objectives of this, and the objectives and the scope? Of course, I've looked at, I've talked already about why and the background, but of course we're looking at how do we are at assessing the participation of the platforms, the current platforms of the community engagement forum, especially the online platforms, the Group.io, the LinkedIn, Instagram, the website, and see how are they inclusive. Do they provide what is needed for displaced persons? Are they accessible? Do they add value? Is there any way that we can change them, or we can adjust them to make sure that they are very inclusive in terms of responding to the crisis, responding to the needs and aspirations of the people that we intend to serve? Of course, under that, we had to look at objectives like we assess the participation initiatives of the community engagement forum. We assess how that supports the community of practice, but also look at the best practices, really, across the globe, initiatives that we think we can draw examples from and have maybe copy some good practices that can be used within the community engagement forum to make sure that things really do well. Of course, after that, we did develop the report, and then the findings here, we are presenting them. Thanks so much. Can you please, next slide? And of course, we looked at, we approached this research using mixed methods by doing extensive review of secondary data and the research that has been done by other practitioners and other researchers. But also we had interviews with the different key stakeholders, most of them being displaced persons, really, refugees and internally displaced persons, We were lucky to have about 25 key format interviews. I know that some of the people that are on this webinar, some of them I interacted with them. I had the questions about what do you think can be done to improve the community engagement forum. Of course, went on to do data analysis using thematic analysis, looking at different themes that really came out prominently, which I think somehow that also informed the title of Beyond Tokenism. Of course, we had to look at ethical considerations in terms of seeking informed consent from the people that we interviewed, such that we can have their interviews or even views published online and in our documents. But of course, across the interviews, we had challenges, language barriers, and of course, this also shows how it is really hard to have real meaningful participation, especially when you have about 40 languages. Because in the process of the interviews, I was doing some analysis of the languages we had, and there are about over 40 languages that were spoken by different displaced persons. In some contexts, I could not have the interviews because there was no one who could interpret the local language that was spoken by people who intended to participate in the interviews, and myself, I could not speak the language, so it became really very very tough to have some participants talk to us, but also reliance on the virtual interview tools. Because if we had, for example, if there was a resources and time to do physical interviews, I think we would have had many respondents in the time that we had, and that affected really the number of people that we could reach out to. Another challenge that we had was the low IDP representation, because most of the IDPs are integrated into the national systems, and I think when you look across the board, we have a lot of, for example, have a lot of organizations that are led by refugees or refugee-led organizations, but it's very hard to find an IDP-led organization across the spectrum. Then the other thing that was a challenge is the issue of digital access constraints. I had sometimes to do WhatsApp interviews where people would not be, for example, on Teams or on Google Meet. So these are some of the challenges that we had. But again, I think it was a very good experience looking at also which some of the challenges we had are actually going to inform the findings, because the community engagement forum is basically something that engages people online, and with all these online digital platforms that we have. Yes, next slide, please. So, like I said, the issue of tokenism or symbolic inclusion came out prominently, and somehow it informed the title of the report as I was writing the report. But I felt like, what do we mean by tokenism? And I was like, maybe we need to define what tokenism is, such that people on this webinar can maybe have also a say on what they think it is. But for me, looking at the sector and looking at how I have been engaging, I think tokenism is in a way that people want to show, or the organizations, the actors or donors want to show that they are once with all that with their journey, they are pushing for their journey, because it is something that is becoming very, very popular. And of course, it's the right thing to do, not even it being popular, it is the right thing to do. But we have more organizations, both local and international organizations, just trying to tick the box to look inclusive. And this is something that came out really from most of the people that I was interviewing. Like, most organizations, both international and local and practitioners, are trying to be sure that they're inclusive, but in practice, that's actually they're not. And if you look at it in the lens of meaningful participation, you realize that actually this is not the case. But I think it's a matter of time because things are moving really, and maybe the pretense at a certain point will come to materialize, because I think it's a process. It's a change that most international organizations, most practitioners, myself inclusive, it's change that we think we are not embracing properly, or we are trying to find ways of living with it, which is really something that happens in every area when you are trying to make changes or to radically change a system that has been the way it has been working. Next slide, please. I was looking at what are forms of tokenism really. We have like participation tokenism. And here I'll give an example. I interviewed one of the refugee leader who is very prominent, and she has been very lucky to attend most of the international forums, conferences, and what. And what she told me, she was like, I am always there, and I don't have any invitations and all that. But the moment I look around and find ways of maybe attending, for example, the Global Refugee Forum, you find the organizations are going to go into the system and search and say who is displaced, which person is coming in this meeting as a displaced person. So what they do, you find when they have confirmed her participation, for example, she will receive like 100 emails, people asking her to be on their panels. So these organizations that have budgets, they have planned for attendance of these meetings and these policy forums, but they have not budgeted for any displaced person or professional to be on their team. But because they know, they want to show that they are inclusive, they want a displaced person to be on their panel. But they don't even want to sponsor one to come, but they want to lead on one who has been sponsored, or is a self-sponsored, or has been sponsored by another refugee-led or displaced network. So what happens is, she was telling me that when you go, you find governments. It's because when you're talking about this, we are even looking at it. If we look at it, it's beyond even organizations. We have governments that traditionally think displaced persons have to be people that you just go and serve. They have no role to play. So she was telling me you get ministers, heads of international organizations, heads of NGOs, donors saying, please, can you come and be on my panel? Can you come and talk? And if she happens to attend one of the panels, it ends there. The moment she leaves, they have ticked their box. A displaced person has been on our panel. They have benefited because they never budgeted for that person. They never supported them. And for them, they move on. No report, no nothing. And this sometimes affects some of us. If you attend a meeting and you had planned to go on one panel, but you also want to network, you want to get networks, but you find out you have 100 requests to be on panels of organizations that even you don't know. So that is one form of tokenism. People are not planning for displaced persons, but they want them to be on their panels. They want to show they are participating in their organizations. Then employment and leadership, really tokenism. Here, it's a very, very serious topic, because when you look at it, for the last, I think, 30 years, UNHCR, in partnership with international organizations, including the German government under the Albert Einstein Academic Initiative, has educated thousands and thousands of refugees. And other initiatives, of course, in the Middle East and in the Americas, in the South America. But it is very hard to find most of displaced persons in these forums, or even working in those organizations, even those that sponsor them. Even when they advertise, they do not expect a refugee or displaced person to apply for their jobs. And someone will be talking about inclusion. Not until you ask them, how many displaced persons or professionals on your team that are working and paid the proper salary? That's when they will start saying, you see, they start giving reasons why they don't have displaced persons. And because of that, because of systematic exclusion of displaced persons in some of these forums, even in leadership positions or employment opportunities, it's very hard to even convince someone to apply for jobs that even they qualify for, because they believe they have been made to believe that they don't qualify for these. They cannot be given these jobs because that's what it has been. But just maybe moving forward, maybe without dwelling on that so much, I would talk about narrative or representation tokenism, where most organizations, they want to call someone, for example, who is a displaced person, needs to be on the team. We quote some quotes, have some quotes from them because they're on a panel and show that, okay, we are actually a representative. Then the other thing, that the other form of tokenism is the funding at the source tokenism, where most of the funding goes to international organizations and other organizations, and budgets really for refugee-led or IDP-led organizations are very, very, very small. But and the other form of tokenism is really policy and advocacy tokenism, where there is little or so much to look at in terms of the policies, or even the views. You call someone who is on a policy forum, but their views and are not going to be reflected, for example, in the final policy report. Next slide, please. So the key findings from this research in terms of content relevance to tone, content relevance to forcibly displaced persons, tone, complexity, and formats. We are looking at also accessibility, usability of current digital platforms, inclusiveness of the structures, especially there's viral board. Then you're also looking at enablers, barriers, and to meaningful participation, without burden, best practices of meaningful participation, and also lesson learned that are replicable elements, really. Next slide, please. In terms of content, looking and tone and complexity and formats of the community engagement forum, we're looking at there is a very general thinking that the way the community engagement forum is made or is structured, it is practitioner-centered. And one practitioner said the community engagement forum is nice for us, but not good for them. There's this divide that this is for us and this is for them. But how do we make something that is for all of us? And that was really something that informed this research. Yes, we have the community engagement forum, which is an amazing forum. Everyone talked about how useful it is, how the tools are very important, but how can we make it useful also to displaced persons? Because issues of language, and one IDP said participation in English is for global meetings, but many forcefully displaced persons are not good at English, or even they are literate. They are not literate. Then complexity and accessibility gaps. One Kenyan refugee shared, I received information about the Shirika plan, but I didn't understand how it relates to my situation or to the current situation. So issues to do with designing something that's relevant, but also that has a language that is accessible and acceptable to displaced persons, but also looking at the complexity or accessibility gaps. Next slide, please. In terms of accessibility or usability of the current community engagement digital platforms, we look at the CEF website or the CEF web page, really, because I don't think it's a website, it's a web page under CCM cluster. And people are saying it is very useful, but not easy for a lay person. And most of the displaced persons are lay people, really. In terms of, when you look at the LinkedIn, YouTube, and Groupile, they are all amazing platforms, but you find that the way the content is designed, the length of the videos, for example, on YouTube, the frequency of how things are posted, but also the voices that inform the content there. You see that this is something that is a high level, that is looking at practitioners, but not looking at informing displaced persons. Basically, because I think that this has been the case, that as someone is posting, you're posting something that you think is going to be seen by someone to NXR, but you're not saying this should be important or even relevant to someone, for example, in Kakuma refugee camp, or someone in northern Nigeria, or someone who's in Tigray region, really. And this kind of language, or this kind of thinking has informed on how the platforms have been used in terms of communicating the information. And when you look at the coffee and chat webinars, and one of the practitioners, or one of the IDP leaders in Nigeria, said these are not meant for IDPs really, because when you attend them, I asked myself, and I was asking myself, if I attend this webinar as someone who is in the refugee camp in Bidibidi, for example, do I find it very useful? Because that's why sometimes you want to call a displaced person, they come and participate once and twice, and then they say, this is not meant for me. And then they not come back any other meetings, and they're like, but we have invited them, they don't seem to be attending. But the question you ask yourself is this forum, or is the discussions here improving the lives of the displaced persons, or this person that has come on the meeting? Or when they sit down, they see the usual thing of discussing things that really are applicable to the high-level practitioners, but not applicable to the displaced persons themselves. Next slide, please. Inclusivity of the board. One of the things I was assessing, and of course asking the people, it was about the board. And things that came out in the board is that there's lack of explicit FDP or displaced persons representation. But again, I hate to say this, but I have to say it. There is the power and decision making is centered around the moderator of the forum. And in terms, though this is really good if you want to avoid bureaucracies that come with having very many decision makers in some of these forums, but I think it comes out as dictatorial structure, which of course does not have the power or the information from displaced person themselves in the meeting, in the board. So barriers, really, we're looking at the barriers, and there is some kind of requirement for community engagement or CCM credentials, which many displaced persons don't have. Like I have said, you find that most of the displaced persons, because of the systematic discrimination from the past, they have not had experience to have very good experience working on international projects, or even working on an organization to understand some of these terms. But also, this is something that I was trying to analyze in a proper way. I was saying, if you invite Epa, who is a refugee from Nakivale, and they have finished school and they have finished 5 years without a job, they're even struggling to put food on the table. And you ask them to come and volunteer their time to be on the board. And you ask maybe someone who has been working in the UN earning $5,000 for the last 5 years. In this kind of question, this kind of representation on the board, it's very easy for someone who's working in an international organization. He has a paid salary per month. It's very easy for them to say, I am giving back to come and serve on the board as a volunteer. How about Epa, who's struggling to put food on the table, who has not had the proper job for the last 5 years, who even having internet may be a problem? Because this is the situation sometimes. Because sometimes one thing I've seen is that when you're trying to engage displaced persons, we tend to treat them like they're like any other people. We forget that these are people that have been under discrimination. They live in resource scarce countries, and they live in peculiar conditions in refugee camps. or in situations where they are not allowed to work. In some countries, where even if they qualify for the jobs, they cannot access them because of the systematic discrimination that happens in the country. So the person you are asking to come and be on the board and sacrifice their time and what, they may even struggle to have money for the internet to attend those meetings. So if the participation is unpaid, it poses economic barriers really. And of course, if you call someone like Epa to come on and serve on the board, I'm going to jump on the this one on the website, read, understand, read the terms of reference and understand what's happening. But some of these displaced persons, when you call them to serve, you need to go extra mile of explaining them what it means to be on the board. What are the benefits? How can they help in bringing their views on board? They need some kind of capacity building and training on how the board works, on how the organization works, and what is their value of being there, and how can their voice be brought up to inform service delivery within their context, or bring in the topics that they think are very important to serve the people. The other challenge or barrier that I found was that most of the refugee-led leaders and IDP leaders, they did not know the board, the CEF board, for example, and they are wondering how it works and who gets to know there. But through all the interviews, it came out clearly that someone who knows the moderator or someone who's connected to someone who's connected to the moderator would access the board. And in the end, sometimes you find you have maybe a displaced leader who is on the board, but maybe if you had a more robust consultation and such, you'd find a better person who's going to be representative of the displaced persons than the person that you have. Next slide, please. Then meaningful participation in the CEF priorities, donor advocacy. Most of the donor advocacy, most of the displaced persons, we found out that they were not aware of the community engagement forum advocacy plans. Of course, they were not also engaged in the development of the messages, which is a close revelation really across the findings that most of the messages that on the CEF platforms and all that have not been informed by the voices or meaningful engagement of the displaced persons. When you look at the CCM trainings or the CEF trainings and e-learning modules, although they are really very good and very nice, but when you investigate them further, you find they lack the input, the clear input and the meaningful input of the displaced persons themselves. And looking at widespread participation gaps as expressed by the people that I talked to, is there is engagement. Engagement is often symbolic. That's something. Tick the box and move on. No follow-up, no nothing. But also lack of content, lack of roles in the content creation, validation, or strategic design of some of these initiatives and some of these tools. But also there is lack of structured feedback in systems, including the board. Next slide, please.
We have about 20 minutes left of the meeting, Epa.
Oh, we need to move fast. Yeah. So what are the perceived barriers and emerging opportunities really? So look at it, we have structural, institutional, but also some participation gaps, especially for women. Really, here I would like to move fast and talk about women. In the interviews, even from the onset, I was getting recommendations from men. Men, interview this, talk to this one, talk to this one, and I asked myself, the women. But when I was doing the interview, there is that displaced persons who are women have different barriers. Some of them have access to internet, but they cannot be online because there is thinking from the husbands, for example, that women who are online, perhaps they're looking for better suitors. And this was something that was also a revelation to me. I was like, oh, this is news, especially from refugee camps because of cultural barriers. Next slide, please. And how do we make sure that there is participation without burden, really? How do you include displaced persons without burdening them? One, there is the financial. We need to plan for finance, because one refugee leader said every project, event, on program has a budget, except there is no budget line for participation of displaced persons. Time and access. How do we make sure that the time and access are not burdensome to these people? Because sometimes you find the meetings are happening at times that are not friendly to these people, given the geographical location, but also the CEF being a global platform, or the platform being global. We find that sometimes when you have a webinar, the people are not there. They are people from another continent, maybe on a different time zone. But also emotional toll and tokenism was something that came out. I've already spoken about this. Next slide, please. Proposed enablers to reduce participation burden. These are things that really came out very prominently that needs to be done. One, language and translation. As I said, a lot of languages that need to be. Then there's need for hybrid, perhaps physical engagements where resources can allow, but also partnerships with trusted actors like Freedom Aid Kenya and other RROs that are within the communities, ensuring that the stipends and ICT support for displaced persons is very, very important. Inclusive leadership and content co-design, making sure that if there is development of content, you do not design this content and take it to them, but involve them in the design of the content, and make sure that their leadership is compensated. But also using simplified tech platforms. For example, there is the observation was that there is disregard for TikTok. TikTok is a very, very good platform as far as engaging, for example, younger displaced person is concerned, but many professionals and many practitioners, including myself, we have been ignoring it. It will look like it's not something that needs to be done, but it solves a lot of issues. For example, when you do TikTok, you can engage most of the people, even those who are not able to read and write. You can give them information, they'll receive it in their time. Next slide, please. So best practices. Among the best practices that were identified during the research is a peer-led digital forums and WhatsApp planning, but also TikTok Live, for example. Localized engagement hubs like the hubs in Kenya, community leadership and decision structures, capacity transfer and eco partnerships, inclusive advisory mechanisms. So here we're looking at in terms of how do you make sure that you engage local hubs that already have structures in the sector, for example, to solve the issue of internet access, which came out prominently. How do you use community-led IDP and refugee network that are already in place to make sure that you amplify the messages that you are having? Next slide, please. So what are the lessons learned in terms of this research, really, and those that I think are really replicable? We need to support participation logistically and financially. That is something that needs to be done, because engagement without a stipend or recognition is not sustainable, like some of the people interviewed talked about. Foster co-design, not just consultation. Recognize and elevate local innovation. Ensure intersectionality and inclusion. Use familiar and low burden digital tools, or low bandwidth, I think, in terms of making sure that you're using platforms that are not data heavy. For example, YouTube is a very good platform, but it is very heavy data consuming. Invest in hybrid and centralized engagement models. Simplify content and prioritize translation, because the issue of translation came out really so much. And institutionalize displaced persons leadership and governance. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Now we're going to talk about recommendations. I'm just going to go through them In terms of platform design and accessibility, one of the things that I thought was very important, but also from the people I interviewed, is that we need to develop a standalone multilingual website for the Community Engagement Forum that is optimized for mobile and low bandwidth environments. We need to create and disseminate visuals, audio summaries, and explainers, and translated micro content for key documents, including small, for example, YouTube videos that are not beyond 3 to 5 minutes or 2 minutes. Use WhatsApp, Telegram, and TikTok on top of what is being done today. But also building feedback loops, like using tools like polls, SME queries, and community-led monitoring. Next slide, please. In terms of the governance and the board inclusions, I think we need to amend the board terms of reference to include at least 2 reserved seats for representatives from displaced persons. One could be a refugee, another one could be an IDP leader. And provide stipends, interpretation, and mentorship for forcibly displaced persons on the board, including rotating FDP consultative panel at country and regional levels to inform global strategy. We have panels at country and regional levels that are informing what is happening at the Community Engagement Forum. But also we have to ensure public calls, regional focal points, and compensation structures that make sure that that participation of displaced persons is not burdensome. Next slide, please. There's something that really came out in terms of capacity strengthening and mentorship, because most of the people are asking, what is the Community Engagement Forum? And some of them are really leaders. And someone's like, for me as a leader who is very prominent in the area, in this sector, it is very telling that I don't know anything about Community Engagement Forum. What are they doing? And if I am someone who attends all these global meetings, I'm here and there, but I don't know what is happening at the Community Engagement Forum. Next slide, please. Compensating and supporting displaced persons' participation, that one I already talked about it. But one thing that I really want to emphasize on this one is embedding gender responsive and multilingual participations, because the issue of gender and women and the girls came out that as we push for inclusion, there's a likelihood that we are going to miss out on the women because they have additional burdens as they're trying to participate. Next slide, please. This is something that really came out in terms of what are the topics that we're talking about. Because sometimes you find we are inviting people to come to meetings, but we are discussing topics that probably they don't see value in them, and that comes because of the participation of the way of who designed, because the person that designs the topics and determines the agenda is very important in bringing something that is important for the displaced persons. If this person is a practitioner, probably they're thinking about their well-being and how to protect their work and how to improve their work, but they're not thinking about displaced persons' well-being. And that's why if you have a displaced person on the team who is going to be able to develop the team or even consult his people, the network, in terms of what is important now that can be talked about, you're going to have a better agenda and perhaps discuss a topic that's going to improve service delivery to the displaced person themselves, rather than discussing tools that someone who is living in a refugee camp in Mozambique, they say, this has nothing to do with my well-being, or someone who's living in an IDP camp in DRC, like, why am I even discussing this? I have nothing to think about, or this has nothing to do with it, my well-being, or even improving how I'm living. Next slide, please. So in the last recommendation, looking at suggested tools, platforms for engagement, and looking at how do we work with within the cycles and the community-led cycles, for example, working with RROs, IDP-led organizations, national NGOs, camp connection bodies to gather experience and insights from FDPs on a quarterly basis. How do we leverage on popular platforms like TikTok, Facebook Live, and radio, community radios to reach out to displaced persons? but also can we partner with refugee-led or IDP-led networks and organizations which are already in place in some areas to make sure that we inform our agenda and make sure the agenda is locally relevant. And how do we sit down and work? Because for me, in my opinion, I think that working in silos is not going to help us. We need to work together. If we can work as practitioners and work with IDPs and the forcibly displaced persons to develop agenda, develop topics, work on things that really are improving service delivery for displaced persons, that would be the most important thing, and that would be a great thing. Thank you so much. Next slide, please. Thank you so much for listening. I hope I'm going to get as many questions as possible. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Epa. That was a lot to go through in a very short time. So thank you for being able to go through it all and, of course, to do the research for us. And yes, it's a lot. And it's not, I mean, if it was easy, we would already be doing it. So there's a lot of great recommendations here. I'm just going to check the chat now. It's a lot of AI assistants, but I don't think they have questions. Fernanda, I think it's more of a comment. I guess it's all about relevance to the forcibly displaced persons. Mo, you have a lot of questions. Do you want to go?
Happy to go third in the queue. I just raised my hand, but I realized colleagues had done so before me. So happy to wait and then go after.
Okay, so we have Emmy first, and then Tembo, and then Mo and Namir.
Thanks, Kirsten. Thanks a lot, Epa. It was super interesting and honestly triggered lots of thoughts and questions in my mind, but I will try to be very brief with my questions as we have very limited time. So I'm actually wondering, I mean, you already touched upon a bit, but both of my questions are going to be on what like the interviews that you had with displaced people provided. In terms of, my first question is, so I'm wondering if there is a consensus among, like in your interviews, among displaced people, if they will represent it, regardless of the context, regardless of where they are from, if there is a displaced person in the forum. You know what I mean is, like, if an IDP, if a refugee from Cox's Bazar is gonna feel represented, if we have an IDP from Mozambique in the forum, because I guess it's like, I don't know, because I think we are a bit too generalizing as well as an identity, that it might be us putting this identity more than there is actually an identity, you know, like I'm trying to understand that part. And also my second question is, I mean, I think for most of the voluntary work that we are doing, which is participating in community engagement forum, is a voluntary thing for all of us. There is a benefit and incentive for all of us, right? Like I joined the community engagement forum a couple of years ago because I thought there was lots of knowledge that I could get from the forum itself, from the exchanges with the other practitioners. I could have a bit like wider network, etc. I'm wondering, actually, what is the exact benefits and incentive for them to join this? Because again, I think it's a bit of too generalization because I mean, in the end of the day, there is no practical almost benefits. We cannot change the service provision in those countries just joining the community engagement forum. And again, like, there are too many contexts with displacement, right? So I'm really wondering, what are the common incentives that were mentioned in the interviews, in terms of, actually, I mean, we could benefit a lot from their participation, but how could they benefit from participating in our forum? So very briefly, these are my questions. Thank you so much.
Epa, do you want to go ahead and answer that before we move to the next?
Yes. one. And the first question, Amy, thanks so much for the question. The issue of having someone, for example, someone representing from Mozambique and someone from maybe Cox's Bazar thinks they're represented. That is a very contentious question, or that's a very, I can call it, I can say it's not a general consensus, because that's why in the interviews there was a need to localize content and localize engagement. For example, if you're discussing service delivery in Cox's Bazar, which has very different policy framework than Uganda, someone from Uganda may not find that conversation very relevant. So it's as we also do engagement, and that's why we talk about very targeted engagements in the report that I was writing. For example, when we're engaging, I know the CEF is a global forum, but how do we, for example, say today we are going to discuss this topic on East Africa, and therefore you invite stakeholders that are relevant and are working within the East African context? Because being on the platform, and I would find a discussion about Mexico border, for example, as someone who lives and works in the Uganda refugee context. So having someone on this, having someone on the CEF does not mean that everyone feels represented. But I can assure you that there is a feeling, if I know that this person who's on this CEF, for example, was in the advisory body is a refugee, there's a feeling of ease in terms of interacting with them, because I know we may be coming from different contexts, but we share one thing in common. We are all refugees and we have lived as refugees, and we have a very common background of discrimination and lack of inclusion. And I can tell you, as someone who has been working in this sector, including in Geneva, that I have met refugees from all over the world, and you find we are almost all of us are advocating for the same thing, even when you're from different parts of the world. So there's a general agreement that when there is someone who is displaced and someone else who is displaced, they can easily engage with them and share with them content I cannot share with someone who's an international. Then the second question, the benefit of joining the CEF. Of course, the CEF is a very relevant platform. No one thinks the community engagement is not relevant, but the relevancy and when you're talking about stipend and facilitating the inclusion is that at the current moment, honestly, if I was a displaced person or as a displaced person, I would find it boring to keep engaging with the community engagement program the way it is. Even when it is very relevant, is providing tools which are really very great for practitioners. But the question is, how are these tools relevant in improving the lives of displaced persons? That is one. Two, the displaced people are already disadvantaged in one or the other. Some of the things I'm talking about here are things that for practitioners, they don't really matter. For example, access to internet. All of us, myself inclusive, for me, the internet is like a basic need. I have a budget for it every month. But someone, I interviewed people who were rationing their internet. They have a time when they switch off and then switch on later because they don't want to use their data that they're supposed to use in a day for within 2 hours. So if they have a meeting, I don't know the last time I don't the last time I did that, of saying, let me switch off data so that I can use it at this moment. These are discussions that for some of us who are practitioners, we may find them like not relevant. But for the first person, they are very relevant because these are real situations and real lives they are living. You may not understand it until you live in the same situation. Thank you.
Okay, Tembo, you have a question?
Yeah, I think I just want to take this time to appreciate what Epa have just presented. I think it is very comprehensive. I know it is not that easy in the context of having everything like compiled to this extent. Epa, I think I want to say thank you very much for that wonderful work that you have done so far. And also take this time to also appreciate the board members who are on this call to make sure that we are also putting in our input to make it much better. In the, I think some communication passed according to the finding that Epa was able to find. It is about like the selection of, I don't know, I just want to learn from him that the selection of the board members depends on the people who knows the moderator and maybe the people engaged in maybe in the committee who knows the friend and the friend. I think myself, I want to decline that one because I didn't know anyone. And what happened is I accessed the information and then placed in my interest. And then after that, from what I presented, it is when I was actually accommodated to the platform, to the board, to be as a board member. I think also to make that one clear, because I'm speaking to the perspective of a refugee myself in Uganda as well, who have been in the refugee system since the age of 3 years to this, I'm now in 40s. The
Tembo?
Tembo, I think we lost you.
Yes. Yeah, no, someone was calling me.
Oh, sorry.
Hello? Someone was calling me directly and that time network went off. So the other issue is, as EPA, according to the finding, I think what is very relevant and very important is access to information. Or people in the IDPs.
Sorry, Tembo, can you start again at the access to information because we lost you briefly?
Yeah, people are just beeping me because I don't know why. Now, next time I have to block the calls in so that I have that better time to present. The prominent situation that have been there disturbing our people is access to information and awareness. Also, that most people as refugee practitioners, RLOs, and maybe the refugees and people in IDPs don't have access to internet. And some of them, they're struggling to put food on table, and then they find it not relevant to have data on their phones. And this becomes a barrier, a big one, to make sure that there is that people are accessing information online and they are able to also to show interest and also to meaningfully participate. The other issue is I think our previous meetings were able to recommend that most of the community engagement forum activities need to be regionalized. For example, if we are having East Africa and Central Africa, we are like that, it is much better because when you are discussing issues, you are discussing issues in the context of that particular region or that particular country. And with this, it is going to help us to people to find it much relevant to the discussions that are being prepared. The other issue also in my submission, where it comes to the policies in the states that are accepting the refugees, we are having different policies in different countries, and we are finding like the different countries are having different policies governing refugees and people that are internally displaced and people in IDPs. So, point in case, maybe when we identify the policy barriers that are also regulating and not accepting the refugees to meaningfully participate or local actors, for example, the point in case like in the statement of the refugee accessing the jobs in Uganda and also registration and documentation, we are having issues maybe where we have like people from the entry have information. Hello, you can hear me?
Hello? I think someone was calling you again. Yes. If you can wrap up your question quickly,
The
Tembo, because there
services
are many people with
are
questions.
actually, yes, the services are actually, some of them need to be to pay for the services in order for them to access. Even now, like in different coordinations, people are being encouraging to tell the refugees that they have to inform them that the services for like utilities, people need to pay for them, but which is something like it is the transition, and people don't have access to this information, which is limiting like the gaps and creating the gaps between the service provider, the community engagement forum itself, and other actors. So if, like, for example, if it comes to the documentation as Epa mentioned it is something that when we have respective policies, for example, in the context of Uganda, the NGO Act, Section 43 limits that the refugees are not supposed to be employed. When refugees are not supposed to be employed, now for their self-reliance, it becomes a problem, and it becomes a serious protection concern that affects everyone in order for them to participate meaningfully. So the other issue also, the other concern is
Tembo, can you ask as quickly as you can? Because people are leaving the meeting because we hit the 1 o'clock mark, or sorry, the 1 hour mark.
yes,
Tembo, maybe you can type your question into this one, and then we'll answer it. Thank you.
yes, I'm finalizing with my two issues. It is the issue of the hybrid meetings and also the TOR, like for the community engagement forum board members. Instead of actually from the finding, actually I realized that even the discussion that we are discussing, sometimes the 6 months can elapse when we have not yet come to a concrete resolution, which I think if we can have it extended from 6 months to 12 months, it can be much better, so that we can have gradual process and making sure that some of the discussions continuously work on. Then hybrid meetings, it is very important, especially on national, regional level, so that people still can come together and see how they can meaningfully participate and have issues that are being discussed. Thank you very much. Over to you.
Epa, over to you. And for the rest of you, if you want to stay on, we will stay on the chat in the meeting as long as people are interested and have questions.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks so much. I am happy to stay for as long as we can have this conversation. So it's a good thing. Thanks so much, Tembo. I think Tembo was not really asking questions. I think was making comments, and of course about maybe the length of the advisory member this one term, and the rotating thing is saying maybe we could increase it in this term. Of course, I also believe that 6 months is a very small period of time. Maybe a 1 year period would be, I think, great thing. But also, these other comments that you made are very important, and I think these are things that have been considered in the report, and some that have not been considered are going to be considered. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Tembo. I've noted it down as well. Your recommendations. Mo, you had many questions, you said.
Yeah, thanks, Kristen. I think some of them have been addressed. I think so. I think when the presentation started by Epa, I had lots of questions, and I was scribbling them all down so I don't forget. and then some of them were answered within the presentation, so I've just reflected on them. But then I think there's a couple of points that that might be still good to raise, and I think one of them is, because one of them was covered by Tembo in his comments earlier, around essentially around the point on being able to engage and what the incentive is for us. So you know, it and the more I think about examples, I hear the point around how, of course, it's great to be part of a global forum and to be able to hear from different different voices. And so, for example, with Epa, you responded to the first question by Chinar on how we need to how actually, if a refugee meets another refugee, even though they might be from two different parts of the world, there's a connection there, and there's some kind of similar understanding of some kind of similar experience, albeit in different contexts. But at the same time, I think given the language challenges that are being raised, and also the difference in different contexts, I think I agree with the point that Tembo raised around the need for there to be regional spaces, and that perhaps the gap is that these regional spaces need to then be part of a wider network, whereby if I'm in community A and I want to speak language A, that I can engage, and then that can then be shared across some kind of network. So maybe some different regional hubs whereby that can be happening, and then they can all be kind of joined up in terms of the bigger picture and the wider thinking. Otherwise, I struggle to understand how much incentive there is at global level, and also the lack of monetary incentive as well. I mean, I think the point was raised, I don't know whether it was Chinar or Tembo, on how many practitioners are receiving, you know, a stipend or a payment. And I think fundamentally, if I put myself in a position where I don't know if I would be giving that much energy and time to such forums if there was no incentive. Of course, there's passion, and colleagues sometimes will volunteer out of passion, but I don't. I don't think that should be taken lightly. So just very quickly, my final point, which is probably the only question that I'm going to ask, was. Yeah, it was around the kind of the objectives of the forum in terms of decision making and different actions versus being a place of sort of promoting best practice, sharing, learning. And so I think those are quite different objectives. And I think if I would perceive that actually engagement of displaced persons or people who have lived experience of having been displaced in the past would differ based on those two different kind of outlooks. So sorry if that's not clear. I can type it in the chat as well in a more succinct way if that was too confusing.
Yes, great. Thank you so much for that. Of course, I did entirely agree with you, and this is something that I looked at in the recommendations in terms of having regional targeted engagements rather than having, because one of the things that we do, of course, I don't talk about, there is something I developed which is called the framework of engagement. Now, there's local engagement or camp level engagement and the settlement level engagement. There is a regional or country level engagement, but also there's regional engagement at, for example, East Africa, West Africa, Middle East, but also there's global engagement. Now, if you have time maybe to read the report, you see what I was saying. How do you, if you're engaging at a global level, who are you going to engage and are you going to call into the meeting and what are you going to discuss? If you're engaging at the regional level, for example, East Africa, for example, what are going to, who is going to be there and who's going to discuss and what are going to discuss? Because people are going to respond to the meetings. People are going to respond to the to your call for engagement, given on the anticipation what they're going to benefit from the engagement. But the issue of, for example, stipend and incentives on engagement, for practitioners, for example, there is one way that makes it easier. The CEF is discussing things and tools that are very important in their day-to-day work. So they have an incentive to be there because this is going to improve their work, the work which they are paid for. And they have the resources because they have internet and they have monthly salaries and they are earning. Now, for a displaced person, imagine someone who does not have a salary or any form of income, asking them to attend a meeting where the discussions or the tools they're discussing has nothing to do with his daily life. Because in the long run, if, for example, even for the displaced persons, if we are discussing issues to do with how they can be employed, for example, even if they would even look for money because they know at the end they are a part of a discussion that will enhance them to get access to employment. If you're discussing, for example, issues to do with how to go beyond the barriers, for example, let's say you have a discussion with a donor, educating RROs on how they can get funding from their organization and how can strategically position themselves, for example. We have donors who now really want to fund RROs, but they don't know how. I have had a conversation with some of them. If you hold a meeting, you will have more than 100 RRO leaders coming to attend that meeting because there's an incentive, because they're being educated and are being given information that is very important to their daily work. The question that you talked about, I had not to get it properly. If you could maybe, did you type it, or if you could just repeat it, please, just in short.
I didn't type it. So to put it very succinctly, I guess it's the point that, so really valuable to hear that kind of distinction between the different levels in terms of global, regional, sub-regional. But I guess that's the point, that even that example that you were giving, would people benefit from joining that at a global level, or would it actually be a discussion that would be much more related to a specific region or a specific context? And therefore, I'm not able to formulate it clearly. Let me come back in the chat, and then I will just come back on it in the chat in a moment.
Sorry, Epa, can I just come in, because I've read your report many times as well, and I just want to clarify or emphasize that the feedback from the forcibly displaced people, so from refugee leaders and IDP leaders that Epa talked to, there is an interest in joining something like the community engagement forum, so a community of practice discussing community engagement for displaced people, but not the way and not the format that the community of practice is right now. So that's the recommendations that you're all talking about with stipends and like more regionalized, localized hubs, etc. So you're right in asking the questions around like what's in it for them, what is the value for them. As it is now, it isn't very valuable for them, in short. But there are very practical recommendations from Epa on how they have suggested that we can become more valuable for them. And it doesn't mean that we have to destroy what the community engagement forum is now. I think it's possible to do both. But these are, the conversations that we're having in trying to strategize for what we will do going forward. So that was just to clarify that they did mention that there would be some value if we're willing to make the changes. Sorry to interrupt, Epa.
No, thanks so much for the clarification. That's very true.
Namir, did you have a question?
Yes, thank you. So, hello, Epa, how are you? You remember we had a long discussion during for this interviews, but you remember, like we have different scenarios. If we assume that the community engagement forum will be the global technical like free advisory forum, or it's going to be regional, or it's going to be to the community level. But I can see in this assessment, it's mainly about how to go to the community level, right? Okay, so it's only studying this specific scenario among the others.
Yes, and no, I think the conversation we had is that the community engagement forum is amazing the way it is for practitioners. And how do we, because there's a divide within the sector. We have practitioners who think the status quo is good because it's working for them. But the question we ask ourselves, is this working for the people that we intend to serve? And that was the base of this conversation. And even the practitioners that I interacted with, I was asking them, do you think there's something we can do better? And there's a general consensus that even among the practitioners, that things are not better and things can improve, even from the side of practitioners. And of course, that also comes to, there's someone here who said, I guess it is all about relevance to FDPs. No, this is relevant to all of us. Because in this sector, really, we are working as practitioners to improve their lives, to change the lives of displaced persons. But the question is, should we keep working for them, or should we work with them? That's the question. And for me, what comes out is that we are better off working together rather than working alone. And in the end, I think for any humanitarian who is really concerned about improving lives, they would support the idea that makes lives better. For example, when you work with them, when you work with displaced persons in designing projects and programs, you use far less resources to achieve greater impact, which I think is something that we need to really think about amid this funding crisis in the humanitarian sector. So there is a lot in terms of offering value, both for us as practitioners, but also for displaced persons. And for them, they're saying, displaced persons are saying, like, the forum is nice, it's good, but it is not serving our interests. It is serving the people in international organizations and practitioners all along, but it's not serving our interests. And the global structures, which I'm not happy to say that they are somehow neo-colonial in nature, you find sometimes they're not serving the interests of the local person or the person at the last mile, but they are serving the interests of the global structures that are already in place. And this participation revolution that we are discussing about here is, how do we bring the people that we usually served to come and serve with us at the same table? How do we move from consultation to meaningful engagement? These are questions that we need to ask. How do we achieve much impact? I'll give an example, Mr. Namel. I have practical experience working with refugee organizations where we were achieving something. For example, using, for example, $1 million to achieve something that would be achieved by $5 million if you went to run an international organization. The similar impact. I do not know why that is not a good thing, especially in the current funding crisis that we have. By saying, if we work with displaced persons, we are going to design better, put resources to better use, achieve better outcome for displaced persons. For me, I think that is something that is really, that would be a noble cause for all of us to engage in. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Namir and Epa. Kate, you've been patiently waiting.
Sorry, I failed to unmute myself. Thanks very much. While I've been waiting, most of my question already got answered. But firstly, Epa, thank you so much. It's been a really, really interesting presentation and even more interesting discussion to follow. I was also going to ask a version of the same thing that's Feda and Fernanda and Mo reflected on, which is, and then Kristen, you came in to speak about, which is essentially for the recommendations made and what the Community Engagement Forum can offer. Who is that useful for and at which level? I think kind of centering around that the Community Engagement Forum is a community of practice. So yeah, I guess it's sort of slightly a question to Epa and slightly a response to what you were saying, Kristen, is sort of through this piece of work with the Community Engagement Forum at the global level, it's a forum for practitioners to share about learning and community engagement theory, which I think for many people, whether they are refugees or not refugees, is not particularly interesting or useful, unless you're very interested in community engagement. So yeah, I was wondering, Epa, from your work in terms of refugee-led organizations, sort of, is there an opportunity to sort of expand the membership to community engagement practitioners from a refugee, from an IDP background, more so? And then I guess, Kristen, what you were saying about the ideas of both regional, and I think maybe some of the recommendations even are more relevant to actual practitioners, sort of how to take some of the really great recommendations here and put them in the right place as to where action can be taken. And some of them, I wonder whether it would be more relevant to the practitioner organizations themselves, who are really able to engage with interested community members, rather than try and say, you're an interested community member, come sit in our global forum, which actually might not be very interesting or relevant to your everyday life. But if you put that person in the right place in terms of engagement with community engagement, maybe then that's where they start to be super interested, and vice versa. You took someone sitting in this forum to a local level conversation, and that's quite irrelevant to them. So yeah, I was wondering, Epa, from your work, does that, in terms of kind of next steps, does that kind of, I guess, cascade of levels start to make sense as to what the Community Engagement Forum, which is, in my opinion, does some really interesting work, but I guess it's by definition quite limited in scope to practitioners at global level, but then at different levels as well, to try and drive some of these recommendations forward. Maybe it's a longer term question, but I got very interested in it, and I'd be very interested to hear your thoughts.
Thank you so much, Kate, for that interesting question. Yes, there is a very great opportunity, and there's very much interest from displaced persons to engage with the Community Engagement Forum. But of course, as I said, when there are some reforms that have happened in the way the Community Engagement Forum is doing its work, and of course, most of these recommendations have been put into the report. But the issue of trying to, when I was writing the report, I was thinking like, we have a tendency as a community, as a practitioners, to engage displaced persons as if they are homogeneous population. That's where now we get it wrong. And you will find, for example, a practitioner telling you, like, why you even bring these people on board? They are just so vulnerable. They need your help. They're about to die. And so we look at them and think about them as if they are homogeneous and a similar population. And that's where we get it wrong. And that's where I came out with a framework, which was, I think, the framework for meaningful displaced person engagement, where I would think there is a need to ask yourself, who are you engaging at the global level? Who are you going to engage at a regional level? Who are you going to engage at a national country level, sub-national level, and the camp and the settlement level? That's very important. For example, when you look at it, just give an example, at a global level, you say, I'm going to engage CEOs or senior leaders of global refugee-led organizations or global IDP-led organizations or prominent leaders in the sector. So at that level, you're engaging people who really understand and who will find the conversations at a global level very relevant. Because their level of understanding, their level of engagement and exposure allows them to comprehend and even contribute meaningfully at that level. So that segregation of saying, I'm going to engage this, then in terms of engagement, in the framework that I developed is, that is the whole. Then how can you meaningfully engage these people at that level? What are the focus areas? what are the best communication channels? For example, if you engage a CEO of a group, for example, we have, for example, in Africa, we have the Africa Refugee Network. This person, you don't expect them to have internet issues. They already have a computer, they have Word, and the topics you're going to discuss with them are very at that level. But again, what are the communication channels? What are the challenges at that level of engagement? And what's needed? What's needed to be done? So this kind of developing that kind of hierarchy it solves a lot of issues and defines on who do you engage and how do you engage and how do they find these conversations very meaningful. Rather than picking someone from the settlement who probably has never been to the capital and you start telling them about the Global Compact on refugees. Probably they'll be looking at you as if you're just, because maybe they're concerned at their level of leadership. They need food on the table. And they will start giving you conversations and bring conversations that you yourself, you will start thinking, maybe I've engaged the wrong person, or maybe these people are not the same. And this comes with a little bit being practical in terms of who do you have on the team, how do you bring them on board. And for me, that's why even, for example, the issue of saying we advertise, sometimes you may find that on the board, you may even need to handpick someone who is a prominent leader in the sector, whom you know that if you engage them, they're going to give you very good advocacy content and leadership than maybe advertising online, and have someone from the refugee settlement whose conversations are not going to be very informative at the level that you're trying to engage. So it's very important to define on these levels of defining these levels of engagement are very important, and knowing who, where, and how to engage it makes everything easy. It makes your work easier, makes my work easier, and it brings out important conversations and important points. If you're meeting, for example, a donor, you need someone who understands the challenges of the sector in terms of funding. Not every IDP or forcibly displaced persons will have that, will appreciate and understand that conversation at that level. You need someone with a particular knowledge and who's going to convince a donor that perhaps you need to fund an RRO or IDP-led organization to achieve impact. It's not the knowledge that every displaced person has. So yes, this kind of disaggregation is very important in bringing the conversation and making sure that it achieves a better outcome. Thank you.
Thanks, Epa. People are asking for the framework in the chat. So the framework is developed by Epa and it's part of the report. So you'll all be able to see it when we publish the report in the next few weeks. The reason why it's still not published, it's still draft, is because we want to give people a final chance to provide their comments and inputs today in this coffee and chat. Sorry, Leonardo, if you're still here, there was a question in the chat.
Yeah, I'm still here, but no, hi. No, I'm new to the forum. I was just wondering what, like, let's say maybe there, I think it's all relevant discussions, but maybe there's like a previous example that could help, like, is there a precedent for involving community members in general? But in general, I think the principle, like us as practitioners, hearing about how people perceive participation from the other side, I do find is useful.
Epa, do you want to answer?
Maybe I just read the question. I don't know if I really understood the question properly. Christine, do you mind trying to what you understood it?
Yes, or I can read it, or do you want to ask it directly, Leonardo?
Sure. No, but basically, like, is there a precedent or model for doing this type of engaging displaced persons within the forum before? Like, just because it seems like a lot of the questions are like, what is the benefit for them? And I think maybe having an example will help people understand like what you want to do. And if it's the first time, that's also okay.
Okay, yes. Thanks so much, Leonardo, for the question. Yes, across the interviews, one thing that we I call them baby steps really. There are some baby steps of what you can do to be more inclusive. And one step is you're designing programs. If you're designing a project, make sure that you maybe look around and find a displaced person from the context in which you're designing to design with you. What we call co-creation or co-designing with the projects. That's one. Two, you are leading, you have a project that you really want to have impact, and you're looking for a partner. Start looking at an IDP-led organization or a refugee-led organization to do the implementing. Because I will assure you, if you implement through a refugee-led organization, it's going to be cheaper and you're going to have more impact than going through another international organization or even a national organization. That is two. Three, if you're recruiting, for example, do you have a target? For example, say our organization as an organization, we need to intentionally have, for example, 10% of the staff from senior management to down the bottom having displacement background, having been either refugees or IDPs, because these people, they do not only come with their own expertise, but they also come with the lived experience of understanding the problems you're trying to solve. So do the recruitment in terms of just make it a target. They say we need people with displacement background, maybe 10% or 5% or 20% on this project need to have displacement background. Because I wouldn't want to provide a general thing, because I know if you recruit a displaced, I may have developed a framework that may not be applicable in Mexico. But if you are implementing a project in Mexico, Venezuela, and you recruit someone who has been affected by the same condition, they likely know better on how to solve that problem than Epa is in Uganda. If you're implementing a project in Mozambique, in Mauritania, or in Nigeria, and you recruit someone who has been internally displaced on DRC and have been internally displaced, and they're a professional with that kind of background, perhaps, and you give them the liberty. Sometimes there's way we recruit, I've been there, you recruit someone with displaced background, but you want them to do what you already have. You don't want to listen to their views. You want them just to implement, to rubber stamp. That's one way of already tokenizing inclusion. You have already a project, it's already designed, but you want to appear inclusive, so you bring someone and tell them this is the script to start implementing. They don't have a breathing space and the flexibility to make suggestions, to make contributions, or to tell you that actually we could do this and have a better outcome than implementing the project the way you brought it, because it demands a lot of flexibility. I do not know if I have given you a better answer, but yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Epa and Leonardo. Tembo, you have a question, and then it was Noor and Rafael. Tembo, you're mute.
Yeah.
Oh, there you go. Okay, good.
Yes, I think I've tried to block. No one is going to call me again. So we expect that my presentation is going to be more fluent now. One of the issues for, I think, during engagement, there are issues we are talking about like high interest and low influence. There is people with low interest and high influence. So in the refugee setting, there are some other situations where you find we are also engaging people, for example, at the government level, when we are doing like maybe advocacy in policy and some other refugee framework to make sure that there is meaningful participation, where we find even people with low interest, we try to engage them, but in the context so that they have high influence in terms of policy, we make sure that we also bring them on board for the point in case like you can find maybe an RDC is not interested in issues of refugees, but when you bring him to a meeting to open up maybe a meeting, for him to open the meeting is you are trying to use his influence position to make sure that he's in position to also to engage the refugee participation and members as well. So in terms of management at maybe in the members, in the board, I think we also need to focus on issues of high interest and low, high and low. There is interest, people who are having a low interest, but they are influential in terms of making sure that there is change in terms of policies in particular states. But you find them like in these meetings, they are always not like interested even to participate because they don't have time. That is one. For example, the government officials in our context here, they don't have that time for these meetings, but they are influential for some other issues in order like to maybe the state to have the policies being maybe worked on. Then I still insist on the issue of inclusivity. We are talking about maybe involving maybe the EDs for RLOs and maybe people in that space. But remember, we are having people with also better ideas who can contribute from the community. And the community, to the point, in case like you'll find most of the women and girls, most of them, they are not in this space and they have not been given that maybe they are not in position to be the ED for prominent organizations that have gone to that level. But sometimes you'll find they are having maybe low influence at that national level, but having also high influence at community level. So brings it to localizing the engagement, like even the refugee welfare councils in the community at the camp level, at maybe the national level. These are people who are supposed to order the information to flow from the community engagement forum to make sure that it is reaching the people. As board at community engagement forum, we plan to have meetings with them and say, okay, listen, this is what is on ground, and this is what maybe our people, our members, these are things they think they can work on ground. So by the time they are planning even to give out donations, these donations should be like meaningful financing the refugee-led initiatives with some of the challenges we find, like even when the calls are coming, you will find like the calls are having conditions for international organizations, excluding refugee-led organizations, maybe refugee-led initiatives, or those community-level groups that can actually really meaningful participate and create change and great impact to the people and displaced people in their respective states. I think that is what I wanted to bring also on board, that during also this report, this is something need to be put into concern, that there are state players in different states that we are operating, maybe having mandate to operate in, who are having low interest in issues of people affected uh, by war and maybe environment calamities, but they have high influence based on their position in government, that we also need to intend to make sure that we are involving. I don't know. I am yet to learn from Epa whether he had reserved some time to also have some discussion with the people from government, from different institutions in government, so that their position can also be included in the report. Thank you.
Wow, that was so great, Tembo, and it's very demanding on my side. One, at beginning from the last point that you made, unfortunately, we were not able to talk to the policymakers or state actors, because given the scope, but also the focus. The focus was really for us to look at displaced persons themselves and ask them how better we can engage them and how we can make the community engagement forum very useful to them. I think maybe we need to have another consultant to talk about how we can how state actors and their interest in terms of community engagement. But I was what you're talking about is really highly covered in the framework. When you look at the national framework, the engagement at the national level, we have state actors as some of the people that need to be targeted, because this agenda is for all of us. We cannot. It's not about refugees. It's not about practitioners. It's for all of us in this space, and we all know that the space has more than refugees and the practitioners. We have state actors. We have donors. We have international companies. There are a lot of actors in the sector that all need to be involved into this sector. But for me, the most important thing is at the end of it all, the most important person in this conversation is the displaced person themselves. And I am very happy that I participated in this process of asking them and trying to understand what they want and how they want to be served better. Otherwise, I have noted your points and I want to be included in the final report. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Tembo and Epa. Noor, you did raise your hand previously before Raphael. I don't mean to skip you, Raphael, but I think Noor just lost her space. So do you want to go first? And then Raphael.
Yeah, Noor should go ahead, please. Go ahead.
Such a gentleman. Try again.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great.
No,
So,
go back.
Oh,
Go closer, yeah.
oh, can you hear me?
Very badly. Okay, Raphael, go ahead.
Okay, sorry about that, Noor. Your audio was a bit low. Thank you, Epa, for the wonderful work and for the presentation so far. So regarding engaging IDP-led organizations, first is to understand what the definition of IDP is. Who do we actually refer to as IDP first before we talk about, because I know for our context here, we have members of IDP, even though they are not currently displaced, but initially prior before now, they were displaced and staying in displacement site. However, they are no longer there, and then they came up with community-based organizations within the communities that they are working. So that is one. And then secondly, about engaging them, we know that generally the issue of conflict of interest. For example, when there's an emergency in a particular community and you have those from the community being the ones to lead the response. Of course, if they're affected, their families, their friends, relatives are affected, they may tend to consider these people leaving out the issue of accountability and then some other factors that could contribute to sidelining or marginalizing some group of people because they are not related or close to this person that is leading the response. So I want to know if you're also looking at factoring some of these risks that attach to engaging this community, the IDP-led organizations or community-based organizations, whereby we can partner effectively and still uphold the humanitarian principle, which has to be neutral. We have to consider operational independence and some other thing. And of course, apart from that, that for most of the contexts we work in, some of these IDPs are staying in a convalescent camp or even in the after camp setting. They rely on the leadership of the stakeholders within the community, which by extension could also influence what could happen when these IDP-led organizations are implementing, because they are more like the gatekeeper or those that piloted the sheltering or accommodation of those displaced people. So I want to know how you can be able to address some of these risks while looking at a better way we can be able to engage them effectively. Thank you, and over.
Wow. These are really very great questions, Raphael, and I wish I had better answers for you. But I think the participation question is comes with first the being intentional. That's the first, I think, the first step. Like I said, we know that if you're designing any project, if you're interested, sometimes it demands extra resources to do this kind of inclusion. You may need more resources maybe than you are supposed to use at the beginning of the project, because you need to identify the right person. And it takes being intentional on identifying in a certain context who are the actors that are local and at the community level. If you are implementing, for example, in northern Nigeria or in the DRC, you need to first ask yourselves, because we have a lot of actors, all of them positioning themselves better to work. And one thing I've learned is that in the sector is that most IDP and refugee-led organizations are not good at positioning themselves. Sometimes you will not even understand and you know that they are there, because we have international organizations who are implementing locally. You have national organizations who are implementing locally. These two actors are well positioned, well funded, and well connected. Now, the IDPs or the RROs are not well funded, are not well connected, and are not known in most cases. So it takes being intentional to identify them as actors that you can work with to design and implement a project or a program. That is one step. The risks that are involved, for example, with the IDP-led organizations are real, because most of them are within their national context. Most of them may even want to do something great, but they fear political retribution because they are still within the state. Most of them are even covered, or they seemingly have programs from the national government that are trying to cater for them. And in most contexts, you find the government receives resources to implement projects to the IDPs in these contexts. So in the grand scheme of things, it depends on you as an organization or as a partner on being intentional, on saying, I am doing this and I'm going to do it with an IDP-led organization. Some of them may not have even what most donors or international organizations say as qualifications. If you do the clear due diligence, the financial systems, the human resource systems, they may not have any of those, because they have been marginalized for so long, and no one has even ever expressed interest in funding them. And they don't have resources to even hire the qualified staff members to set up these systems. So being intentional is very important. And realizing that you're working with a marginalized group is very important in identifying these organizations, knowing their risks, and also taking the risk to work with them to see if you're going to achieve better results. I am not sure if I give him the best answer, but I've just tried to look at how do you really identify the actors on the local ground, both either being IDP or being refugee-led. But I know it's a very tricky thing to do. I don't know how to do it, but I can just give a little bit of what I know. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Epa. I think it was very good advice. Noor, do you want to try again? No.
Hello, can
Yes.
you hear me? Okay, Mama, please. Please. Hi. Thanks again for all the questions and answers. It's been quite interesting. Just to reflect and try to like remove my CE forum hat and ask myself like very, very transparently, what are we, who are we trying to target here? Like knowing that I work a lot on segmenting, the audience, and I focus a lot on, naming what kind of audience I'm looking for. And maybe I can give an example of, for example, if we run a medical, I don't know, like publication website online, how do we expect to subscribe to this research website? Is it going to be any person online, or is it going to be a person who is interested in this medical field that is that wants to know more about, for example, what's the latest innovation, discussions, etc. And I ask myself a question here, like, am I being a bit I don't want to say tokenistic, but am I really assuming that anyone on the internet or any displaced person out there is interested in what we're trying to say? And what's in it for them, again? Or are we really targeting people that are practitioners, regardless if they come from a displaced population or not? Because we provide, resources and tools and discussions and etc. So a displaced person is not just a displaced person. They have lots of different. I was displaced for some time, but I did not call myself displaced. Like I'm a practitioner, have experience, let's say, in humanitarian work. Yeah, so like, again, do we want to widen our audience to reach everyone, which might have a lower impact, as whether we are trying to communicate to everyone, or do we want to say, okay, we want to target displaced people, and we also want to target displaced people who are vulnerable and do not have access to technology, internet, translated materials, etc. Like, because again, like it's a virtual forum for practitioners, and I've been working in this field for more than 15 years now. And I remember, like, I used to sit in an apartment, and in the other room there was the wash person, and I tried for 2 years to convince them to do some participation work in their projects. So, and not everyone in the international NGO likes to, do participation work and community engagement. So we cannot say we target everyone in the international organizations, and we do not target everyone in the displaced population. So someone who's in a camp, barely like trying to, get themselves water and feed their children at the end of the day, may not be interested in learning about a new tool. But maybe someone who's a refugee leader or an IDP leader might be interested in what we're providing, and then we need to channel the support to them rather than the general public. So regardless who they are, if they were displaced or not. And we noticed this, like we've seen this in our satisfaction surveys for 2 times now. Like we want, like there are some IDP practitioners asking, for more inclusive tools, which makes perfect sense, and we've been trying to reach them also like online, and now like 66% of our followers on LinkedIn are from like non-INGO or UN agency groups. So I think it's very important for us to like have this in the back of our heads, just to know who we are, position ourselves sometimes like modestly, like, okay, this is what we do. A lot of people may not be interested, but some people would be interested, and how can we serve these people better? And that's my point. Thanks.
Thanks, Noor. Epa, I will let you answer that, and then Tembo, if you could write your question in the chat, we'll make sure to answer it in the summary or in the newsletter, because I'm going to have to cut the meeting soon as we've gone an hour over, and I have to go. But Epa, if you would like to answer Noor's questions first.
Yes, I think Noor, you raise a very great question. The question is, of course, when you look at, I'll give you an example. When I was doing the analysis, I realized that we had about 43 languages across the world, across the people that I interviewed, and these are 25 people speaking about 43 languages. If you just even did interpretation, translation of that document, I don't know where you would get resources to do that. So that's why one of the things I talked about is targeted engagement. And it's very important to sit down and say, who do we want to talk about? And of course, you said it, the first thing, leaders. Because leaders are representatives of people. And if you reach out to them, someone saying the information will trickle down to the community. We have women leaders, especially if you're targeting leaders who are female leaders, and some organizations led by female leaders, people with disabilities, women, female leaders, but also who are with disabilities. It's very important to say we are targeting this sector of people, but at the moment, it is really very clear that going forward, you need to look at how we can work with representatives of these groups at first. Before you say you can work with the groups. Also, local engagement is very good, but is it possible practically? Do we have the resources to do so, for example, at camp level or even settlement level? These are questions that I cannot answer. Maybe Christine has a better answer. So, first of all, we need to be targetful. We need to be mathematical. We need to be economical, given that we don't have enough resources. But we need to know also define our target, define this one. Of course, we have very good network of refugee-led organizations, and we have their leaders, and most of them are struggling. Is there any way that community engagement forum can engage these people? So it's kind of a discussion that we cannot exhaust here, but I would say it's all summed up in the issue of targeted engagement. Who do we engage? How do we engage them? And how do we reach out to them and solve some of the challenges they are facing, which at the moment I don't know, but if you talk to them, they will tell you. And you can start from there. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Epa. Tembo, please write your question in the chat, or you can WhatsApp me, and I'll make sure that it will be responded to. We're going to have to close it here now. But again, thank you everyone who participated and asked excellent questions, and it's clearly an important discussion to have, and it's far from over. I'm very excited to be sharing Epa's report very soon. I think a lot of your questions will be answered through the details in that report as well, including the very requested framework. So happy birthday, Epa. And I hope it continues as well as this conversation has been.
Thank you. This has been amazing. 2 hours of conversation on inclusivity. There's no better way I would celebrate my birthday. It's so great.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, everyone. We'll share it as soon as possible.
Oh, thanks so much. It's been nice talking to you people. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, and super interesting. I still have questions, and I am looking forward to seeing what happens. I might send them through.
Do, please do.
Super
Oh,
interesting.
If you wanted to
yes,
send
sure.
them in the chat, then everyone can see them and hold us accountable for answering them. If you want to send them directly to me or Epa, you can also do that.
Yeah.
I'll see what happens. I'm
No
not sure
worries,
yet.
Tom.
I'm
Thanks so
still
much for
writing
coming.
it. Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Super interesting.
All right. Yes, thank you.
Thanks very much. Bye.
Thanks, Kate. Bye.
Thanks.
And happy birthday.
Oh, thank you, Tom. Appreciate it. Yeah.